I mean, is this deliberate? So he's behind and then just doesn't turn. It has to be deliberate.
2025 keeps on delivering. That was quite the GP to have in Barcelona, and it's gonna make me miss this track. From start to finish, there was always some type of controversy, beautiful overtakes, and quite the end that I don't think anybody really expected to see. Lewis talked about it right before the race, saying that the actual front wing flexing TD was a complete waste of money, and I tend to agree because there was pretty much no change between the pecking order, and if anything, McLaren just showed off how dominant of a car it is. But there was a constant fight amongst the field. Barcelona, this track, really was extremely entertaining, and it gave us quite a good GP with no rain. It did have a safety car, and Max, while he was entertaining, did something that probably nobody really expected him to do in quite the weird way to do it as well. So let's go over one of our last times here at the Catalunya track. If you're new here, please go ahead and like and subscribe, would mean the world. But let's get started with the race. As I said earlier, we had the McLarens up in the front, Max was in P3, and he gave us quite the quote in the beginning saying, "It's all about turn one, let's make it beautiful." And typically, when the lights do go out in Spain, with it being such a big run down into turn one, he does end up overtaking Lando, who is notorious for his great starts from track to track, and he does have the pace in the first laps to try and catch Oscar Piastri. In the meantime, a guy in a very slow green car ends up making about 5 places on lap 1. His name is Nico Rosberg, and what a GP this man had. Now, just to tell you, he didn't win Driver of the Day. I'll have to tell you at the end of the video who ended up actually winning Driver of the Day after this chaotic GP. The Ferrari boys actually make up a lot of good positions as well in the start, and Lewis has a very good start. He's always been known to have very good GPs here in Spain. Alonso on lap 2 does make a move around turn 3, which we saw all GP. There were so many spots on this track that you typically do not see overtakes, and that was so refreshing to see. So little of DRS overtakes were made here in Spain. We saw overtakes in turn 3, turn 4, and the tire differential made a big difference, hence why Formula 1 really should enforce more two-stops, but actually making the tires degrade enough to where we can see beautiful racing like this. Gasly and Hadjar were also racing out for those top midfield positions. Good job by Gasly, put that car up as high as possible with the Alpine. Clearly, it didn't have the race pace today, and Isaac did a great job in that Racing Bulls. I do think that car was the best midfield car by far, even though he didn't finish the highest out of the midfield cars, shockingly enough. Another thing here with Ferrari, the strategy, yet again, they should have swapped positions much earlier. Leclerc was much quicker, and it seems like in the start of these stints, Lewis just does not have the confidence in these very fueled up cars in the start, and he's always lacking pace. At some point, they were only about a second to 2 behind Lando, and by the time they made the decision to swap positions, and the way that Lewis did it wasn't great either, they ended up going about 4 to 5 seconds behind, and that does make a difference over a race length. So I'm not sure what's the thinking and why it always takes Ferrari more than 15 minutes to figure out what they're going to do on strategy. But by lap 8, it was already time that Max was losing those front tires because of trying to push even a little bit on Oscar. Clearly, he had the slower car and that Red Bull is still lacking pace. I think it's going to be very track dependent on whether or not they can win or even fight for that victory. The McLaren car is just phenomenal everywhere, and the front wing flexing, it didn't do anything, which I kind of figured it wasn't going to make a big change, but when the team principal is talking about it being a game changer, you kind of have your mind swayed differently, even though in reality, it was about a 5mm change. It wasn't going to change much considering this car is just as fast as it is. And at some point, usually Max ends up fighting for positions. He didn't even try to fight with Lando on that straight, ends up giving him the P2, and now Lando is on his way to try and catch Oscar. Now, this was very shocking seeing it from Max, but towards the end of the race, we'll talk more about that incident. It just doesn't make sense where his mentality went from to where it ends up finishing at. Now, there was also an error by Alonso. This was tough to watch, as the guy does not have points. He does now. But up until this point in the race, going into the gravel, this cost him big time, because if he didn't end up doing this, he would be the guy being praised right now at the very end of the Spanish GP. Now, it's nice he finished in the points, but I can tell that his frustration was plenty because after the race, all he did was wave and he didn't say anything on the radio, even after scoring his first points of the year. As I was speaking about tire differential, there was a pass by Max on Antonelli. It didn't look the greatest, but it was still fun to watch because that is just not a spot you see too many overtakes happen at. And that was because of the tire differential that overtakes like this happen. No DRS, just some beautiful wheel-to-wheel racing. Alonso was making his way back up after that terrible incident going into the gravel. He still had a very solid GP, but what could have been if he didn't go in the gravel. And the Red Bull team was leading in strategy. They probably had the most optimal strategy of anybody on the grid up until the end. They were going for that 3-stop, pitting Max very early on to end up giving him enough pace to pretty much just put in qualifying laps after qualifying laps. But it all unfolds at the end after a very controversial tire choice. At this point in the GP, it's a lot of pit stops, there's a lot of overtakes being made, very good racing. I think we have been entertained the whole way through, and it really was a fun time. Liam Lawson got into contact with a couple of people, a couple of very iffy moves with Behrman, Albon at some point, but I do think the move that he made on Albon was a very good move. Max, as I said, was putting in the pace and he was charging up for most of the race. He was making a lot of good overtakes, was very calculated and measured, and very calm on the radio, even after not having the car to truly fight for a victory. Also, might I add, watching these front wings flexing, there is a change. They still do flex, which is just normal. It was going to happen. But yet again, I truly believe what Lewis said about it being a waste of money and time is so true. And on lap 48, this is when he ends up going for that last stop. And he ends up coming out between Yuki and a Haas car. But Yuki gets out of the way. It is kind of crazy to see that there's two teams that will just get out of the way from Max whenever possible. Racing Bulls and Red Bull. Just nobody will fight this guy. There was a chance here at some point. By lap 48, he wasn't going to catch them, but the strategy was a good call from the start of the race. But this is where it gets very entertaining and what you guys are all here for. The title of the video, let's talk about when the safety car comes out after Antonelli goes off the track. Man, Mercedes powered cars, while they are the strongest, if it's not the McLaren, the Aston Martin, the Mercedes themselves, even the Williams struggle a lot with cooling. I'm not sure what's going on from that side of the car, but it's consistently one of the cars that's DNFing because of engine problems. Now, it was a choice here between a lot of teams on whether they should stay out or box and go for a tire choice. Now, the McLarens, they double stack, they barely just get in Piastri and Norris. Verstappen also heads to the pits, and the team puts him on hards. Now, they had a beautiful strategy. I think it would have been much better, even with the tires being destroyed. Just have Max out there, try and defend. The worst he could have finished was probably P4. I don't think Hulk would have caught him in P5. But making the decision to put him on hards was always going to be a tough task on the restart. And Max, seeing the hards, he was baffled. He could not believe what the team had done. And truly, I was shocked when I saw hards as well. I was like, there's no way this is going to work out for 5 or 6 laps of racing. And this track in general from the start of the weekend was never good for the hard tires, hence why a lot of teams did not even try running them in the race. But that was the only tire choice they had because they pit so many times. He ended up finishing in Q3. No more softs, no more mediums, unless he wanted to go on something that was already very heavily degraded. But it should have been communicated between the team. Let's not do this, stay out, and we'll figure it out. And yet again, I do think the safety car takes way too long. They should have these unlapped cars just do it straight away. I do think they should finish in the pack. It makes a lot of sense for all of us to stack up. It's the most fair. All in all, the safety car takes way too long and we lose way too many racing laps, truly, whenever there's a safety car. But when we do go racing on lap 61, Max has a huge snap, which anybody could have predicted with him being on the hards. And Charles gets right beside him, and this is when Max starts to get extremely enraged. And while I get it, I think anybody would be frustrated if you were put on the worst strategy. You just had an amazing GP, and it pretty much all goes to crap and, as they say, hits the fan. But it could have happened to anybody. He typically has the best strategy. Leclerc doesn't even bump into him. He had the right to stay straight. I think Max kind of nudged into him himself. Maybe Leclerc moved a little bit left. Regardless, I don't think this was anything to complain about, and there's definitely no deserving penalty here. Leclerc was perfect in this race. I think he was very deserving of the podium. So was Max up until the incident. The penultimate lap, lap 65 of 66, Max gets told by GP to let by Russell. Now, sure, should he have let him by? I'm not sure. It was a very interesting move that George made up on the inside. Should Max have actually kept it? It's very controversial. You can go both ways here. I think it's a 50-50 call. George was right beside him. He did kind of push him off track. So there's a debate for both the Red Bull team and the Mercedes team, but just fight it after the GP if you are Max. Now, we do find out after the race that actually Max was in the okay to not give up the position. So there was definitely frustration building, and it made a lot of sense as to why Max didn't want to give up that position. But of course, this is in hindsight, seeing what happened after the race, and with it being now announced from the FIA, he didn't have to give it up, which is part of the frustration. Instead, he lets him through and then deliberately goes into him. And I don't even have to think about it. I think anybody can see that Max was just seeing red at this point, goes into the side of George for no reason whatsoever. Sometimes he makes moves that are very controversial, like he did in Mexico, but actually, when you look back at it, it made the most sense to make that move at that time. But this completely threw his race out the window. And I think based off of this, he probably had like a 3 to 5% chance to win the championship anyways. It's probably gone to under 1% now because he finished P10 with a penalty. And I think actually a very easygoing penalty considering what he did. If we actually look back to Vettel and Hamilton back in Baku in 2017, where Vettel went into the back of Hamilton deliberately, he ended up getting a 10-second stop and go penalty, which would have put Max completely out of the points. He got a point out of this. And while I do believe this guy is completely championship material, I mean, he is one of the best drivers of all time, 4-time world champion. He's phenomenal in his pace, but this attitude just didn't need to come out. This was the old Max, and there was just no reason for this. He completely tossed any view of a championship in the future all over a P4, P5 position. George also put in a pretty good stint. I mean, like, it just happens. Sometimes the bad luck goes your way. The bad luck went for Max. For once in a blue moon, Red Bull made a bad strategy. They are the best strategist team by far on the grid. I mean, if Max was in Ferrari, he'd probably crash the car into the wall every single race considering what just happened. It can happen to anybody, but this was definitely a deliberate move by Max, and it was just not needed. He completely tossed what was a good and great race by himself into the bin. Now with this though, Nico finished in P5. I'm not sure how many P5 finishes he had in the Haas, maybe 1 or 2, but finishing P5 in this green car in particular, that is a podium. Like pretty much, this is going to be a podium on his record. Now we won't remember this in 5 years' time, but for right now, we can definitely be very happy about it, and well done to Nico. I mean, he went from pretty much the back of the grid all the way up to P5. What a race by Nico. Definitely the driver of the day, but actually Max got driver of the day. Yeah, I was shocked to see this. Now, these results come in somewhere around the 80 to 85% mark. And while I do believe he probably was the driver of the day till that point, Nico was definitely up for debate. Charles was up for debate as well. Isaac could have been thrown up there. And Max, of all people, ends up winning, finishing from P3 in the start to P10 in the finish. I mean, it was quite the race. As I said, I think the penalty was too easy going. He should have gotten the stop and go. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. It's not really like this is a very controversial penalty or what Max ended up doing. I think we can all assume, even if you are a Max fan, that it was deliberate and he shouldn't have done it. He tossed his chances for no reason. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it in the comments below. Please leave a like, subscribe. It would mean the world. And peace.